For some, the discussion about security is a nice intellectual discussion to be having. For us, it's an existential issue.
The Finnish policy is rooted in historical experience. Over the years, we have maintained our national capabilities. We never let our guard down.
We are all well familiar with the concept of total defense. This means that our military and civilian structures, together with the private sector and civil society, are acting as one.
Welcome to the Helsinki Security Forum, Helsinki Security Forum, the Total Defense Edition. There's no apathy allowed here, but we all have to contribute to the action part of building a European and transatlantic total defense for the 21st century. I'm Charly Salonius-Pasternak. I will be the MC for the afternoon. At FIIA, I lead our US research and focus on regional security and defense. And for those keeping score, also one of the many, many Finnish reservists in this room, since we're talking about total defense. Now, it's wonderful to see so many familiar faces here, but also new faces, because as we're planning the Helsinki Security Forum, we always want to make sure there's enough of the old familiar so that people are comfortable, but also ensure that there's something new, that all of you, all of the participants, as well as the people following us over the stream, walk away from this weekend with some new ideas, some inspiration, some idea of how to make our societies more secure. Now, this afternoon's opening session is an interview of President of Finland, Alexander Stubb, by the Financial Times Brussels Bureau Chief Henry Foy. This will be followed by our first full panel on towards a total defense of Europe. Before that, though, we actually need the opening remarks. And to do that, I would like to invite on stage the acting director, Dr. Mikael Mattlin. He will be followed by Klaus Korhonen. He's the chair of the FIIA board, as well as Finland's former ambassador to NATO. As Mikael walks up here, he's the acting director. He's been the acting deputy director. He's also led the Institute's Center on Global Orders in China. He's been a professor of political science at the University of Turku and a professor of Chinese studies at the University of Helsinki. Mikael, take it away.
Thank you, Charlie. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the year 2024 has underscored the urgent need for a comprehensive and proactive approach to defending Europe in the face of a grim security situation and proliferating geopolitical uncertainties. The current state of the world provides a sobering backdrop for the third annual Helsinki Security Forum. This year's forum brings together thought leaders, policymakers and experts to address the conference theme. In Finland, we have long talked about comprehensive security. The concept signifies that we need to be prepared to deal with any disruption, be it a broken oil tanker in the Finnish Gulf, a pandemic disease like COVID-19, or a military conflict. In preparing for such eventualities, seamless cooperation between government authorities is a great advantage. And perhaps even more importantly, close and flexible cooperation between the government, the business sector, non-governmental organizations, and all citizens. It is very much a whole of government and a whole of society approach to security. A broad understanding of resilience where every member of society in principle has a role to play. The concept of total defense, which we use in the title of this year's forum, may be more familiar to our distinguished foreign guests. Total defense is also about a wide range of activities and actors, but the focus is clearly on preparing for hybrid attacks and, in the worst case, a full-scale war. How can society support the efforts of military defense? How can society survive and function under attack? In fact, the total defense concept is very close to NATO's understanding of resilience. Whatever our approach to resilience, we need international cooperation, which supports and complements national efforts. We need solidarity, and we must be ready to show solidarity to others. This is a European question. It is a transatlantic question. It is also a global question. The Helsinki Security Forum continues to solidify its role as a leading Northern European platform for high-level dialogue on security and defense matters. With each passing year, the forum's influence grows, and so too does the urgency of the issues it addresses. Our discussions during this year's forum will delve into, among others, the future of the European security architecture, the Russia factor in European security, the role of the defense industry in securing Europe, climate security, military use of AI and its governance, protecting critical infrastructure, and many more. These are all questions that we study at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. In our interconnected and increasingly complex world, FIIA's work is more vital than ever. This year, HSF will benefit from the support of more partners than ever before. The involvement of our partners is crucial for the success of the forum. Their contributions will enhance the depth of the discussions. And I would like here to express my gratitude for your commitment. The future of European security depends on our collective ability to move from discussion to action. Given the significance of the forum participants present here today, the HSF is not merely a venue for debate, but a catalyst for enhancing European security. Through joint commitment, close collaboration, and appropriate burden sharing, we can build a more resilient and secure Europe. On behalf of myself and the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, welcome to the Helsinki Security Forum 2024. I would now like to ask Ambassador Klaus Korhonen on stage. Mr. Korhonen is currently the Ambassador for Policy Planning at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland. He is also a chairman of the board of FIIA. He was previously Ambassador of Finland to NATO 2019 to 2023, and after Finland's accession to the alliance, the first Finnish permanent representative to NATO. He has also previously served as Ambassador for Arms Control at the MFA, and he was also President of the International Arms Trade Treaty, among many other duties. Mr. Korhonen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mikael, for your words, and also thank you for the good work as the acting director of FIIA. Of course, also on my behalf, warm welcome to the third edition of Helsinki Security Forum. We have a wonderful program, and already at this stage, I want to thank everybody who is contributing to it. Now, in recent years, FIIA has become an increasingly visible and prominent European research institute. FIIA has also grown in terms of personnel, and I want to thank the former FIIA director Mikael for his crucial role in the development of the institute. A lot has happened since we met here in Helsinki last year. Mika is now a member of the European Parliament, and the board has conducted recently a thorough process to select a new director. We have chosen Professor Hiski Jaakkola, and Hiski will start at the helm of FIIA on the 1st of November. Many of you know him, and I think with his broad experience, Hiski will provide the visionary and dynamic leadership that the Institute needs in the coming year. You will hear more about HELSINKI and his views this evening over the dinner. Mikael covered many topics of our forum. The main focus during these 3 days will be on resilience, the ability of our societies to cope with crises and to recover from them, and on what is the role of European and transatlantic cooperation and solidarity in this effort. Here, many lessons can be drawn from Ukraine's resistance against Russian aggression. The question that certainly comes up as well in many panels is how can we best continue supporting Ukraine in the fight for its security, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to introduce our first guest, President Alexander Stubb. He will discuss with Henry Foy, who is the Brussels Bureau Chief of Financial Times. The strength of our democracy is an important dimension of societal resilience. In the Helsinki Security Forum last year, 2023, Dr. Stubb was one of the presidential candidates who were interviewed in the pre-conference event up there in the Sky Room bar, top floor. Subsequently, in February, he was elected as the 13th President of the Republic of Finland and assumed office 1st of March this year. The Finnish presidential campaign of the 9 candidates was remarkable in being very polite, constructive, and respectful. The campaign presented an alternative to the rather polarized and negative political culture which dominates a large part of the Euro-Atlantic area and which is not unknown in Finland either. Before the presidency, Dr. Stubb had a political career as Prime Minister and Foreign Minister and had other ministerial posts. He has served as member of the Finnish Parliament and also of the European Parliament. He has also been a Vice President of the European Investment Bank. Dr. Stubb holds a PhD from London School of Economics and has an academic background as a professor in College of Europe and in the European University Institute. Mr. President, Henry, it's really great to have you, both of you here, and the stage is yours. Thank you.
Whichever one you want. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Charly, Klaus, Mikael, for the great introductions. Mr. President, thank you so much for coming and agreeing to chat, especially given you came straight off the plane from New York. Good to know that the UN General Assembly remains the warm-up event for the Helsinki Security Forum.
Yeah, I feel very fresh. I apologize in advance if my cognitive capacity today is suboptimal. So.
I wanted to kick off with New York. Mikael there just described the global environment as grim. How's the global conversation? What are people talking about? What was the feeling there?
Well, I guess, usually when you come out of these, we're there for 5 days, 5 full days. You sort of, you're asked, what are your takeaways? And I guess in this particular case, the sort of bad news or cause for pessimism, but then good news and cause for optimism. The bad news, of course, is that we have 3 major wars raging in the world, one in Europe, one in the Middle East, and one in Africa. So Ukraine, Palestine, and Sudan. And one could, I guess, safely say that there was no real progress on those, albeit there was a good call for a ceasefire in Lebanon by G7 and 3 Arab states. Albeit there were good conversations about Sudan, and Zelensky had a very strong proposal for a victory plan. But the good news, or the reason, the cause for optimism, is that I sort of came out of the week thinking that there's a chance that multilateralism will be back. And it started with this Pact on the Future, which was approved on Monday. Interestingly enough, it was the African state that pushed it through the finish line, isolating Russia, Belarus, Iran, North Korea, Syria, and Venezuela.
Yeah.
And this to me was, a sign of something. So, I had a chance, about 15, 20 leaders, mainly from the global south, and I was trying to push the idea that multipolarity, which Russia and China to a certain extent are talking about,
Correct.
that leads to disorder. But multilateralism actually leads to cooperation and order. So, it was 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, as these UN meetings usually are. But I did come out of there probably more optimistic than I expected.
Keen to talk about Zelensky and how he was, but in terms of the attitudes towards Ukraine, did you notice any shift compared to over the last 6 months, say? I mean, there's a lot more conversations I certainly pick up on about peace settlement happening almost publicly. Things that were taboo 6 months ago.
Yeah, I mean, 2 observations on that. First, I think we, especially in the West, have to understand that there's a clear connection between the war in Ukraine and the war in Palestine. And we can see this in voting patterns already. So if you look at the beginning of the war, it was, if I recall correctly, 141 in favor of Ukraine, 35 abstaining, and 4 against. Now, the latest vote that we had on Ukraine was on nuclear safety, which, should be pretty self-evident with Zaporizhzhia and the rest of it. And that was only 99 in favor of Ukraine, roughly 60 abstained, and then 14, 15 against. So there's a clear shift, and in all the conversations that I had with especially leaders from the global south and partially the global east as well, they said, listen, there's an element of double standards here.
Yeah.
You talk about territorial integrity, sovereignty, you talk about international law with Ukraine, but you sort of are a little bit more quiet about it when it comes to Palestine. So there was that link. Now on Ukraine, did I sense war fatigue? Not really, but we all do understand that the American elections are looming.
Yeah.
There was a package of roughly $8 billion coming from the Biden administration. There was bipartisan support, but then some pushback, obviously, from Donald Trump. I had a chance to talk with Zelensky. I think it was my 6th meeting with him in 6 months. So we talked for about half an hour, and I sensed that he was probably a little bit more optimistic than certainly what he was when we first met in April.
Optimistic about what?
Optimistic about his capacity to get what he wants, which means finance, ammunition, military equipment, and then eventually the right to use long-range missiles without any kind of limits, as long as they are for defense or within the framework of international law. So in that sense, I came out of that meeting as well optimistic. And to be honest, you can sense with leaders, are they tired? Are they worn out?
Yeah.
I didn't sense that at all with Zelensky. There was sort of this rejuvenated president of Ukraine. And of course, what I tried to do personally, because for us, the war in Ukraine, that's our war. It's the foreign minister talked about foreign policy for us being existential. Yeah. It is for Ukraine as well, but in many ways we focus on that right now. We try to convince the Americans to give unlimited access to long-range missiles. We try to convince the global south that if Russia is allowed to violate international law in Ukraine, acquire illegally territory, which is 20% right now, the same will happen all around the world. And then we go into this multipolar disorder. And my big fear, of course, in all of this is that the UN is pretty much absent in peace mediation. Yeah. They tried in Syria, failed. They're not in Sudan. They're non-existent in Gaza, apart from UNRWA. And we don't see them in Ukraine. And when peace mediation is transactional, when there's no multilateral institutions, we very rarely get results, and that's what worries me.
I noticed that quite a large push by the Indians to sort of put themselves as a global mediator on the Ukraine crisis. You've said this summer that China could end this with one phone call. Yep. Is there a risk that, I'm not saying we shouldn't outreach the global south, but there's a risk that Europe takes a back seat and this deal is done without us?
Well, there's always that risk. 2 observations. First one is, what did worry me a little bit was the sort of absence of China and Russia
Right.
from the UN Assembly, obviously Russia for rather obvious reasons,
Kinda hard to get a
but China wasn't there. So you could see sort of probably a stronger dominance than from the US, the UK, France, and certainly also from the likes of Brazil. I've pushed for China to get involved, not because I believe in the Chinese-Brazilian six-point plan. Sure. I actually disagree with the fundamental elements of it because it doesn't talk about territorial integrity, but because China has such a stronghold on Russia right now. Yeah. So my argument is that if you talk about peaceful coexistence, harmony, and peace in general, then you need to put your money where your mouth is. Yeah. And I think President Xi's stronghold on Putin is right now so strong that he should do something about it. It'll be really interesting to see what the reaction now is from the, once again, rather aggressive rhetoric on nuclear arms coming from Putin, because the last time it happened, it was China and the global south that said, enough is enough.
Did you get a sense from Zelensky that he trusts the Chinese and Brazilians to get a deal done, or?
No, I followed his speech, which I'll be very honest with you, in the UN General Assembly, leaders don't usually follow each other's speeches, right? You have all the trainees taking notes there and the rest of it. But I went to listen to Zelensky's speech among others. On that, he had, in my mind, two things that he focused on. The first one was nuclear power, not nuclear arms. Sure. But he was very worried about his energy infrastructure, 80% already bombed. What's going to happen with Zaporizhzhia? He talked about them having intel that Russia might be making a move on the nuclear power plants. The second one was he specifically mentioned in interviews and elsewhere the Russian-Brazilian plan, and he was sort of pushing back on it. He said it's not a good starting point, but the Ukrainians are very good at this. So what I could envisage is Zelensky's 10-point plan with some kind of language coming from proposals coming from the global south and the global east, and perhaps have that as a starting point. But we're certainly not there yet.
You don't think we're anywhere near the start of these talks?
No. I mean, I was a little bit more optimistic after the Peace Forum in Switzerland in June, but I still feel that we're quite far away. The good news here, though, is that militarily, Ukraine is in a much better place than what it was in June. I'm not saying that it's over and done with. No, I mean it's critical at all times. But I do think that Kursk, whatever we think about it, I'm looking at General Jaakkola here, whatever we think about it from a military strategy perspective, I do think that it shifted the psychology of the war, and that's quite important. And I think Russia has shifted somewhere around 43,000 troops now from the eastern front up to Kursk, and they're holding fort. So we're very much in a classic stalemate, kinetic type of a situation where a lot of it comes down to your capacity to sustain loss, which is obviously horrible to say, but that's the reality.
I wanted to pivot briefly to the Middle East. I mean, you mentioned the ceasefire demand. Netanyahu basically said, no thanks. What was the reaction in New York? I mean, are people realizing they have lost control of Netanyahu?
Well, one could say that, yes, with a few caveats. But so I had a chance to speak with President Herzog on Thursday before I left. Then I met President Abbas. I met the President of Iran, which is obviously quite unusual. And then I also met the King of Jordan. And the situation there obviously is extremely tense, and I am, much like anyone else, worried about escalation. I would argue that the King of Jordan, as we saw in his speech as well, is very worried about escalation. The President of Iran, if I may, he at least did not talk about the rhetoric of escalation, albeit I was trying to push him on, what are you going to do with the Houthis? What are you going to do with Hamas? Why do you keep on supporting Hezbollah? So the Iranians are, using proxies and trying to de-escalate. But then again, Netanyahu, if I were to say he's trying to de-escalate, I think I might be pushing it a little bit. And I was quite disappointed, admittedly, that first there was language coming from Israel that they will accept the ceasefire proposal in Lebanon. And then when Netanyahu landed in New York, the language was completely different. And they're clearly preparing on our active in a land war. So the situation is very tense. De-escalation is what we're trying to do. My big take on this, the optimist in me says that this has simply gone too far. This must be the tipping point towards a two-state solution. The pessimist in me says that this has now gone so far that we are beyond the point of no return. I don't think anyone knows that. I think what we're probably going to see is an end to the military operation in Gaza, and therefore a focus somewhere else. Interestingly enough, if I may, we look at the opinion polls in Israel right now, and for the first time, Likud, so Netanyahu's party, is actually gone ahead and rising. At the same time, final point on this, this is probably the most emotionally draining conflict that we have in the world right now. I mean, it's mind-boggling to see, and I fully understand why, how emotionally attached people are to one side or the other. There are very few who can sort of be in between and take a helicopter view on it. I struggle to do that myself, but I keep on saying that for a country like Finland, it's very important that we're not pro-Israel or pro-Palestine. We are pro-peace. We're pro a solution. But of course, we don't have the keys to that solution. We can just support from the sidelines.
I mean, no more than in the US, right? And the impact it could have on that.
Well, the US has a slightly bigger role in this conflict, as in many other conflicts, than Finland has. And they, of course, can work on it. But I could also sense a little bit in the corridor certain frustrations right now with Israel. Once again, if you looked at the street, what were the demonstrations in New York? It was all about Palestine.
Yeah. You talked a lot in New York about Russian hybrid attacks and about the need for Europe to remain vigilant and strong. Do you expect these hybrid attacks to increase as the winter rolls on, as Ukraine becomes a much more difficult fight for them, and they to bring incidents to Europe that would divide populations?
I say that, yes, we expect the hybrid attacks to increase, and that is exactly what we are preparing for. So Russia is basically waging two wars right now. One is kinetic in Ukraine, with, of course, new elements into the conduction of warfare, with glide bombs, with drones, with more technologically sophisticated equipment. And then the other one is hybrid warfare. And in hybrid warfare, you can, of course, look at a range of issues. I mean, you can list anywhere from 10 to 20 to 30 different actions that you can do. And that's why, as an academic or otherwise, I'd say that the line between war and peace has been blurred. So, it's about information wars. It's about potential sabotage attacks. It's about hitting infrastructure. It's about cyber attacks. So there's a big range of things that can be done. And what I'm trying to say for us here in Finland, because usually we're quite cool, calm, and collected about everything.
That is your reputation.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's mine, but
no, it's Finland. Sorry,
but in general, yes. And so my message is that we shouldn't react to everything that comes out of the Kremlin, especially on the information side. Of course, if it is a clear, sabotage attack on our infrastructure, be it a gas pipeline or data line or something like that, or if we see a cyber attack, we're much better, together with Estonia, I look at their military chief here, we're much better at fighting cyber attacks than we were when it actually happened, sort of for the first time in 2007 in Estonia, in the banking system. So we work on a lot of these things, and when I say cool, calm, collected, what it means for me is that first we look at what has happened or what was said. what was said, for instance, about the demarcation of borders. Think before you act. Then, secondly, once you find out what has happened, you look at the different options of who did it. When you find out who did it, that's when you attribute.
Yeah.
And when you do all of this, in these 3 steps, you have to be in close cooperation and coordination with your allies.
Yeah.
Because if Russia does the same hybrid attack on the same day with us and say with Estonia, we have to react exactly the same way. Otherwise, they will have won the day. And the same goes also for public discourse. We have to be very careful with what kind of information we circulate into the system. The aim of Russia is try to intimidate, destabilize, and sow the seeds of fear into Finnish society. And we just have to be vigilant and basically understand what is true and what is not.
I'm keen to get questions from the audience, just a couple more from me. We have a new European Commission, or at least a proposed one. It has a defense commissioner for the first time. You're someone who spent a lot of your career in politics looking at the EU in and around it. How do you feel about that, Europe, the EU taking on a bigger role in defense?
Yeah, I mean, I had a chance to chat a little bit with Ursula von der Leyen as well in New York. I know her many years back, and I, of course, congratulated her on her commission. I think what we're seeing in Europe right now is sort of unforeseen, almost historical unity. I know we always look at disunity and we mention Hungary and so on and so forth, but look, the previous von der Leyen Commission is one of the strongest commissions that we've had since Delors. And what links them? Well, what links them is a big shift in international relations. Yeah. So Delors was there at the end of the 80s, early 90s, end of the Cold War. And of course, von der Leyen is there now when we're seeing a big shift in world politics, not knowing exactly where it's going. And then it becomes crisis management. So, how did Ursula von der Leyen deal with COVID? Well, actually extremely well. How did she deal with the war in Ukraine? Well. How did she deal with the energy crisis? Well. And now it's interesting to see how her second commission would work. To me, it looks like she's set up more of a team than kind of a group of superstar big names, if you know what I mean. And that's why it's going to be interesting to see how they do it. The Brussels bubble, which you live in and you report from, and I read your stuff every day. You probably know it better than I do, but I do think that she starts this commission from a position of strength. But I always say that it's not the president that makes the agenda, it's the agenda that makes the president. So it just depends on what kind of crisis she has to manage in the next 5 years.
I mean, just finally on the defense point, Jens Stoltenberg, the outgoing NATO Secretary General, said last week that any kind of duplication of efforts of NATO is a bad thing. You're a brand new NATO head of state. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, well, Jens and I talk about it a lot. We have to keep in mind that, well, I'll put it in 2 ways. We have to keep in mind that Norway is not a member of the European Union.
Correct.
And you have to keep in mind that for years, Finland kept on talking about we need a stronger defense in Europe. Now that we're in NATO, why? No, I mean, I do think, in all seriousness, I do think that the European Union has a role to play.
Sure.
But duplication is something, of course, that we need to avoid. If I may, I'll take a little bit of an issue, Charly and Mikael and others, with the term of the conference, total defense. I would like to talk about comprehensive defense, because that then widens the scope a little bit more towards the European Union.
Right.
And in comprehensive defense, my predecessor, President Niinistö, is now doing a report on that. I think that you fight wars on the battlefield, but you win them in civil society and at home. And we need to, look at resilience and the capacity of our societies to sustain big hits, anywhere from, a weather catastrophe to a war. And the European Union should be good at that. So, and also I think on defense industry and investment in defense and those kinds of things. But to have duplication of operative structures, I mean, that's no point. It's hard enough for us to integrate our military into the NATO, let alone to the European Union.
Yeah. Well, and also the European Union is calling for targets that NATO have had for decades and people just ignored. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's also a sign of times. I mean, in many ways, I'm good friends with the Prime Minister of Luxembourg, Luc Frieden, and I sort of understand why Luxembourg isn't there at the 2% target yet. I mean, when you live next to France and Germany and the Netherlands nowadays, it's kind of a safe place to be. But on the NATO side, it's quite astonishing that in 2014 you had only 3 countries that reached the 2% target. Now we have 23, and I think what we have to prepare for mentally in the alliance, including of course Finland, is that this threshold will increase with time. And that's a sign of times. When you have an external threat, you unite. That happened in NATO, and that happened, of course, in the EU. Final point, that's why I think actually the Helsinki Security Forum is simply so timely, and I'm glad that it was founded, because it just came at a time when geopolitics was back and when security is the only talking town.
Yeah. Well, there could be an internal threat if Donald Trump wins the election. Any questions from the audience? Yes, there's one gentleman here with his hand very highly raised. Could you please introduce yourself and please ask a question? Don't give a speech.
Thanks, Henry.
Oh, hi, Ben.
Good warning, well heeded. Thank you. Benjamin Tallis, Democratic Strategy Initiative, Berlin. President Stubb, it was very good to hear you say that Ukraine's in a better position militarily than it was back in June. It could be better still, we all know that. But if we might be approaching negotiations at some point, one of the key issues is going to be security guarantees or security assurances that will be provided to Ukraine. In your view of the options on the table, which ones would you support?
I think thanks, Ben, and nice to see you live, albeit against the light, so I can't really see you. I think you have to go step by step with these. So what are the steps? Hypothetically, step number 1 are these security arrangements that we've now done with X amount of countries. I think it's reaching almost 20. I think we were Rasse, do you remember, were we number 7 in signing the security arrangements with Ukraine? Something like that.
Top 10.
The US did it. We now have a coalition, et cetera, et cetera. The second step is hard security guarantees. And I actually think they have to be bilateral. And if I was Zelensky, I'd probably want them from the likes of the UK, the US, or France.
Yeah.
And then the third step is, of course, EU membership, which in and of itself, in my mind, is a security guarantee. I know that a lot of hardcore defense specialists would say that, well, they're not real, that Article 42.7, it's not serious, but it's still an institutional security guarantee. And then, of course, the fourth step is NATO membership. So you have to go very, very careful on that. But I have said that what Zelensky needs is 4 things, and I keep on repeating them, but I have to be vague because it's not my decision. The first one is territory. The second one is security guarantees. The third one is justice, so war criminals indicted. And the fourth one is reconstruction. So when he starts working around these and then gets the 10-point peace plan, I think we could get there. But security guarantees have to be there. And that's why I keep on saying, and I'll keep on hammering this down, Ukraine has already won the biggest battle. And the biggest battle was about its independence and its identity. And it's been able to push back the Russification of Ukraine now for over 2.5 years. And it's not going to lose that. Russia is not going to take over Ukraine. Simple as that.
A gentleman here, I think, had a question on the front table.
Yes, Markus Armo, CEO of Fortum Finnish Utility. I have a more practical question. So, Mr. President, you spoke about we spoke about total defense or comprehensive defense, and in order to prepare, you need situational awareness. And you, as in the presidential position, you of course get the information of all security authorities. but this is not necessarily the case in corporate life. So question about the situation awareness. What potential do you see in sharing, let's say, at least semi-public information between the large actors in the society, so that we can also direct our preparedness maybe to the more likely threats than the non-likely?
Yeah, no, thanks, Markus. So for those of you who don't come from Finland and are not intimately acquainted with our system of comprehensive defense, it's something that a lot of our allies are looking at very closely right now. So our basic thinking comes from societal resilience. That's why we have civilian bunkers for over 4 million people. That's why we have a security of supply agency led by Janne Känkänen. And I would probably feel that is the place where you get the key information and cooperation, because that agency has, I think, 17, soon 18 contact points. One of the key ones, of course, is on energy supply. So there's a contract, I would assume, with Fortum, with Neste and many others about what kind of storage should be kept and where and how it can be distributed. Then, of course, next we go into the situation room with General Jaakkola, and we look at, what are the elements that can be shared with society by and large. I would like to assure you of two things. One is that if there was a situational awareness where Fortum or any other bigger player would need to be informed, that would happen immediately. I mean, we don't have a problem with that. The second one is, I have to say that now that I've been President of the Republic for almost 7 months, and coming back into it, kind of to the information flow, coming back into it after a break of 7 years, I sleep my nights very well. I've been in our logistics center in Tampere. I've been in our situation room. We've looked at our operative plans. I've had conversations with all of the key civil servants in our society, from the head of police to the head of the border guards, to the head of our secret service, to, of course, to the head of our military. And I think the way in which we have structured our society and its resilience is simply impressive. And this is not, I'm not trying to inflate what we have done, but I am simply convinced that there are not too many other countries that are as prepared for a tight situation as we are.
Just to follow up on that, actually, it made me think, how much conversations do you have with other leaders in Europe, heads of state, heads of government, about that thin line between preparing publics for the worst and scaring them? I mean, It sounds like Finland has it just about right, but there are probably other countries in the EU where people are a bit too blasé, and maybe others where they're a bit too jumpy.
Well, it's probably, the closer you are to the Russian border.
I can think of some exceptions.
Yeah. The more prepared you are. I think there's a quite an interesting anecdote here, is that I think once the war began in Ukraine, in Finland, we have tried to calm things down, and I think more or less we've succeeded.
Yeah.
But in Sweden, they printed a pamphlet, what to do in case of war. So there's a slight sort of difference on how you prepare. But in many ways, I think preparedness is an understanding that we have a resilient system, that we have a system that works, that functions, that we are prepared. Because the better prepared you are, the less likely you are to see a bad situation. Deterrence is it's the best way. And I think we are sort of, well, now I come to the total defense. I mean, we're prepared for most scenarios, except, of course, the unknown, which can always, happen. Yeah. But I look at our military preparedness, and I keep on repeating this, and I'll do it once again. We are a country with obligatory military service, with 900,000 men and women that have served, with 280,000 that we can mobilize in wartime. We're a country with an air force with 62 F-18s, soon 64 F-35s. We're a country with long-range missiles in the land, air, and sea. We're a country with the biggest artillery in Europe, together with Poland. And we don't have these because we're worried about Sweden. You know.
Any more questions in the room? Is that a hand there? The lights are very bright. I think there is one there. Yeah.
Thank you, Henry. Sergei Utkin, University of Southern Denmark. Mr. President, you lately made a number of very far-reaching remarks on UN reform. I have a twofold question on that. Well, as an academic, you perfectly know all the hurdles for any substantial UN reform. So if it is basically impossible, especially when it comes to veto right of permanent members of the UN Security Council, does it make sense at all to start this discussion? And if it is blocked indeed, what could be plan B for multilateralism on the global level that you talked about?
Yeah, so the starting point for suggesting reform and doing it concretely on the basis of multilateralism is that we are right now retracting from multilateralism precisely at a time when we need it more than ever. Conflicts, climate change, migration, sustainable development, technology. They're all global goods which we can't solve alone. And what we're seeing is this, as I said, multipolar disorder where nation states don't anymore abide by rules. And then you come to the question, do we have another institution apart from the UN that could do it? And the answer is no. If the answer is no, you have to understand that it needs to be reformed. Now, realism or not, I basically made three proposals. One was to double the number of members in the Permanent Security Council from 5 to 10, and that would be 1 from Latin America, 2 from Asia, and 2 from Africa. We would still maintain the 10 elected members, which would mean that in the most important multilateral institution in the world, you would have 10% of the world's countries at any given time in the UN Security Council. I think that's a suggestion that could fly. I genuinely believe that. And certainly, you know, if you listen to countries from Latin America, Africa, and Asia, they say, yep, let's go for it.
Sure.
And many others as well. The second suggestion, scrapping the veto power. There I understand that it's probably unrealistic, but we have to understand and point out that one of the reasons that the UN on a political level is often dysfunctional is because of the veto power. If you look at all the agencies of the UN, of which there are roughly 20, we forget that the IMF, we forget the WHO, etc. They're UN agencies. They actually work quite well. They don't have a veto power. So I'm sure there'll be a big sort of fight about, as there is in the EU about, scrapping unanimity. And then my third suggestion, I'm still optimistic about that, which was that if you, as a UN Security Council member, violate the UN Charter, your voting rights should be suspended. That was the one that I got applause from in the General Assembly, which in the General Assembly you don't get applause. So there was a lot of traction, I think, for the suggestions, and they follow pretty much the Nordic line, perhaps Nordic line plus. And I will see. We'll see what happens. I'm still hopeful because either we reform or then we don't exist. I mean, it's as simple as that.
There was a lady here in the blue who was waving her arms. Yep, there. Yes, next to the camera.
Thank you so much. My name is Veronica. I am a reporter for Politico Europe based in Ukraine, and I came here from Kyiv. I wanted to ask you, you said you saw Zelensky victory plan, right?
No, I didn't. No.
Okay, so we got a glance in Kyiv before his meeting, and one of the points is NATO invitation as soon as possible. With the current state of affairs, do you think it's realistic for Ukraine to get this until the end of the year? Thank you so much.
Till the end of the year, I would think it's unrealistic. But in the long run, I think it's realistic. I think the sort of sequence will be EU membership first and NATO membership second. And of course, sometimes it's a long path towards one or the other, or both. But as I said, I think we should look at the sequence of security arrangements, bilateral security, guarantees. Then after that, we need to get EU membership, and after that, NATO membership. Finland's position is that we support Ukraine's NATO membership together with the alliance. But the timing, of course, has to be right. And as we all know, a country that is in a war situation cannot be taken into the alliance. May I add to that? Have faith. It's going to happen. You know, it's not. Don't hang everything onto getting the invitation now. It is going to happen. It's a step-by-step process. Russia wanted to avoid at all costs getting NATO to its borders. It got Finland, it got Sweden, it will get Ukraine, and all of those countries that want to join the alliance.
But if it can't join while it's in a conflict, that gives Russia every incentive to never stop.
I don't think so. There will come a point where the war has to end. Wars always end at some stage. Of course, you know, what makes it so horrific is that there seems to be no limits to what Putin and his regime are willing to sacrifice in the face of this war. There is this sort of combination, unfortunately, of time to time incompetence combined with indifference.
Yeah.
And that is probably one of the most dangerous combinations that you can have when you feel that you have eternal resources. You pay the public, the families of the dead or injured soldiers, so much that they keep quiet. But at some point, this will end. And in that sense, I think that NATO membership right now is not what's going to end it.
Yes, question here, gentlemen. Just hold on 1 second, we'll get you a microphone.
Derek Shear, I'm the former U.S. ambassador to Finland. And I wanted to ask the President, since you've studied in the United States and you know the country well, how worried are you about what is going on in the U.S.? And do you think if things go badly in our election, that Europe could go it alone?
No, hi, Derek. Nice to see you. Yeah, I mean, I've always been an amateur of American politics ever since I studied at Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina. I'm Finnish by birth and Southern by the grace of God. In 1989 to 1993. What worries me most in the U.S. right now is the level of polarity that we can see in society, how binary it has become. And of course, as a sequence to that, what worries me is that we're starting to see similar tendencies in other liberal democracies in Europe. My take on the election is that it's very much a toss of a coin. It's the American public that decides. And the optimist in me says that the United States wants to remain a superpower. Therefore, it needs allies. And the strongest allies are values-based allies, not interest-based allies. And they, of course, come from Europe. Of course, there is a difference in the rhetoric of the two candidates vis-à-vis Ukraine. And I think there is a general understanding in Europe, regardless of the election result, that we will have to take more responsibility, not only of our own defense, but also of our own security. I, however, belong to the category of people who want to see the United States engaged, not only in Europe, but in the world. Because historically, and I don't want to over-rationalize, when the United States isolates itself from the rest of the world, doesn't take the space of power that it is given to or that it usually takes, it doesn't lead to good things. We saw that before World War I. We saw that before World War II. What happened when the Cold War ended was sort of this, intellectual laziness with all of us. We thought that, okay, here we have a unipolar world led by the United States, and all of the countries in the world are going to revert towards some kind of liberal democracy, globalization, social market economy. But it didn't happen. We forgot that we have to contain the bad elements of mankind and of nation states. But yes, I am worried about the polarization of American society. And I don't say this as a Southerner. I just look and listen. I mean, I'll just give you an example. I mean, I used to think that Rush Limbaugh was extreme, right? Yeah. And now it's sort of kind of mainstream. I thought it was, an interesting oddity at the end of the 1980s, early 1990s. May he rest in peace. But now, when I go on American TV channels, which I did CBS, Fox, and CNN this time around, there's a slight twist in the approach that they take, and I kind of want to avoid that. And I think at the end of the day, and sorry for a slightly long answer, the big problem is that liberal democracy has not adjusted to modern technology. We are not able to cope and have a civilized dialogue anymore in the way in which we used to when things were slower. I mean, Klaus alluded to it earlier. We were actually able to do that quite well in the presidential elections here in Finland. The reason is that for us, foreign policy is existential. But we see elements in national politics where there is strong sort of polarization between the left and the right, so conservatives and liberals. And we see that in the US as well. Final point. The big worry I have is that we're not capable to have fact-based discussions anymore. When truth becomes irrelevant, when facts become irrelevant, and you believe in something which is not true, and an algorithm feeds that truth to you, you lose autonomy and your own capacity to think. And that we're seeing some elements of in the US elections. Nothing matters anymore. Indifference is a bad thing for democracy.
Mr. President, that's a bit of a dour note to end on, but end we must, sadly. We could talk for hours, but we need to get you off the stage, apparently. So
I can go home and sleep, no?
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening and for your questions. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Sure, I think we...
Thank you, Mr. President. And for those of you, we're going to have a very brief technical break just to get some more chairs up here and get our first panelist, Mike. Thank you. I hadn't thought of it. Pick a chair you would like. Where are you sitting? I'm going to sit here at the end, so I'm kind of most off the stage. Gentlemen, if I can... Ladies and gentlemen, if I could please ask you to take your seats, that would be great. All right. So the boss has left the building. Now we can get to discussing total defense or comprehensive defense. We actually thought a lot about what we should title this. In Finnish, it's kokonaismaanpuolustus tai kokonaisturvallisuus tai yhteiskunnallisen turvallisuusstrategia, the comprehensive societal security strategy. There will be a test on this later in Finnish. But the key point being, let's not get hung up on the term. Certainly all of FIIA's future publications will be using comprehensive defense, though. But why did we choose this topic? Well, quite simply, the previous Helsinki Security Forums had discussed major war, its return to Europe, and then radical uncertainty. And we thought it was very natural then to, well, discuss how should we do this? How should we defend and deter in these eras of radical uncertainty and major war? The purpose of the panel is to kick off a discussion that will range across the weekend. Specifically, we'll have, of course, as we've heard, critical infrastructure, technology changes, etc. Here, I hope that in the next about hour and a half, we'll get some insights to at least the following questions. Against what kind of threats to societal functioning should total defense be developed? What are the fundamental concepts or building blocks when developing this? Of course, rarely can you copy any single thing from one country to another. And what role should militaries, civilian agencies, private sector, including large multinational companies, non-governmental organizations play in developing these comprehensive societal security architectures? And most importantly, and I assume this is going to come up, in developing these cultures of cooperation. Now, ultimately, states are largely responsible for doing this within their own borders, but cooperation is necessary. So we will also touch on what the EU's and NATO's role here may be. Now, to discuss this, we have 4 experts with a deep and varied background. Their bios, much longer versions, are online, so I'm just going to do a very, very quick introduction. No one came really to listen to me or to me to read long bios. So, first here we have Janne Jaakkola. He's the Chief of Defense Finland. He served as CHOD since April 2024. Prior to that, he was the FDF's strategy chief. Prior to that, head of J5, so strategic planning, chief of logistics, and he's also served in Kosovo and Afghanistan and has a fairly long and distinguished career around Finnish Special Operations Forces. Then we have Marta Kepe. She's a senior defense analyst at RAND. She focuses on US and allied capabilities, irregular warfare, civilian-based resilience, and Russia. And her recent work, which is available on RAND's website, I believe, is on analyzing resilience and resistance in the Baltic states and in Ukraine. Like Jaakkola, and you'll hear Merilo, Marta is familiar with Kosovo because she worked on the NATO advisory team, as well as the Latvian MOD. Received her MA from Georgetown, where she also teaches. And then we have the Chief of Defense of Estonia, General Andrus Merilo. He served this charge since July 2024. Prior to that, he was the Chief of Operations and Administration separately. His military education includes studies at the Finnish National Defense University. I, in fact, noticed his reserve officer badge or pin here, and the Command General Staff College, the U.S. Army War College in the U.S. He has been deployed to Kosovo, but also Lebanon, Afghanistan, and Iraq. And then we have Petri Gornitzka. She's been the Director General of the, and I'm going to have to read this because I use the Swedish acronym, Swedish Civil Contingencies Agency, known as MSB to basically everyone else who works in this, since December 2021. Prior to that, she had more than 2 decades of experience in international development cooperation, Assistant Secretary General for UNICEF, Chair of Development Assistance Committee at OECD, and also head of the Development Cooperation Agency in Sweden, and a lot of experience prior to that in the NGO world. So, with that, let's get started. The idea is we're going to start here. I'm going to come for some questions and then go back, so hopefully get some back and forth. Think about your questions, and at this point already I'll remind you, please introduce yourself, who you are, and where you come from. So, first question to all 4 of you. Could you give a brief sense of, or describe how you see total defense, or the national equivalent phrase, against what threats it should be developed, to protect what, and then, when appropriate, how your organization fits into this whole? We'll start with that.
Thank you, Charlie. Of course, our president already described the Finnish model of comprehensive security or total defense. And my perspective in the opening remarks is now to give you a kind of a pitch talk about how I personally see that we could export all this know-how, all this knowledge about the comprehensive security approach, for example, the European countries. And I would do it in a very simplistic way. Military is always simplistic, with alphabets. And I will start with the first alphabet. I have 9 points, bear with me. The first one is alpha, it's awareness. The shared awareness, the shared understanding of the situation, and the fluent information sharing is the basis for the decision making. And this is, of course, fundamental for the security of the society, not only the military side, but also on the civilian society. In the European context, do we agree on risks? Do we agree on threats? Do we have the same indicators, same warnings, the same approaches to different risks and threats that we see around us nowadays? That's the first question. We have to have the same approach. The second point is the bravo, be prepared. So you cannot invent these things when the storm is already has started. I would like to shape the famous saying by saying that you might not be interested in crisis, but the crisis is interested in you. Of course, as the president said, the authorities, they handle the incidents, but the societies, they solve the crisis. In the Finnish model, this means that the cooperation levels, they are local ones, regional ones, national ones, international ones. And you have to have it all around. There cannot be missing parts in this one. On the other hand, on the horizontal level, you must have the governmental organizations, you must have the private sector, you must have non-governmental organizations, and even individuals participating to the model or the security questions. Baseline, you have to own the problem. You cannot outsource it. And I think that's has been the tendency for the last decade, is that we can, the incidents or the risk or the threats have been not that existential, so that you can bit of an outsource it. But as what we see nowadays around us, you cannot do that. And it's all based in the societal level, it's all based on trust, and the trust is built on practical cooperation, plans, and training. Charly, the capabilities. You have to have the capabilities for readiness, for preparedness, for response, resilience, and recovery, the whole setting. Of course, Delta is domains. You have to be prepared in all domains: air, land, maritime, cyber, information sphere, you name it. And you have to have access, you have to have security in the domains. ECHO is enhanced cooperation and coordination. You cannot do this in vacuum. And especially in the current security environment in Europe, you have to coordinate, you have to cooperate. Foxtrot is the functions. What are the vital functions of the society that we secure? In Finland, we have framed 7 of those. There can be more of those, but you need to frame them, and you need to be very firm on those, because they are the baseline for the whole society to be prepared. The Gulf is the geopolitics, and it's about economy, and it's about technology. And the security is now involved in everything. The hotel is the high-intensity warfare that sets the standard. And of course, the high-intensity warfare, what we see, for example, now in Ukraine, sets the standard, but the current issue, the current reality is the hybrid influencing. And the last point is investments, innovation, and infrastructure. In order to be prepared, you need to have a strong economy, you need to have a strong internal market in order to build a baseline for the cooperation. Thank you, that was my pitch.
Well, that's it. We can all go home now. Excellent. Thank you. Marta.
Yeah, thank you. First, thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm so happy that this year the forum is dedicated to this very important topic, obviously a topic that's close to my heart. And I was also really happy to hear that the president also favors the term that I favor, comprehensive defense. But either way, as I'm thinking about what modern total defense or modern comprehensive defense and security should look like, I was putting it first in terms of what are the experiences that we have gone through. So, you know, we can go back, it's very popular these days to go back to the experiences of a Cold War, where the total defense concept was started out. Actually, it was Sweden as a very important actor there, right? As a result of those sort of total war experiences of Second World War and General Ludendorff's work on that before, actually, in the 1930s. But then over the last 30 years, we have gone through other approaches to national security. We have whole societal, whole of government approaches, all hazards defense. We have thought about how to address other threats to our nations, not just conventional military warfare. So those are all the sort of processes and changes in our thinking that I think should also inform our thinking about comprehensive defense today, in addition to the newfound focus on conventional warfare. Now, today, also particularly in the European context, you know, we're sitting here in Finland, relatively new NATO member state. For us today, total defense, comprehensive security also has that collective defense aspect that wasn't necessarily there for Sweden, Finland, Switzerland, Austria during the Cold War. So there is a collective defense element as well here to be thought about. And in terms of threats, all right, we want to make sure that comprehensive defense prepares us for a conventional war, and that it also prepares us for hybrid threats and increased intensity of hybrid threats, right? That we can do what we need to do to make sure that national security is maintained under the threshold of war, but also over the threshold of war. So today's total defense, in addition to what I just mentioned, also means that we have a good understanding of how we do our networking across the horizontal but vertical lines. So the C2 components, how do we coordinate, but also the vertical components, now that we have so many different actors across the government, public sector, private industry, NGOs, groups of individuals, well-off individuals as well, who are engaged in different roles in building our comprehensive security, or at least whose actions can also affect our vulnerabilities. Second, it's comprehensive defense that is inclusive, so there are options for everyone to contribute, either to the more armed, unarmed options, according to whatever your capability and availability is. Then, a defense that responds to new and emerging vulnerabilities. We not only have to prepare for changing threats, changing nuances in the threats, but also we need to prepare to how our own vulnerabilities can change. New technologies introduce great things, new technologies make our lives more fun and easier. They also contribute to our defense capabilities, but they also introduce new vulnerabilities that we constantly have to think about. Then we do, and this is related to the network part, that we have pre-negotiated relations to key actors across the community. Next would be, in fact, something that you spoke about, shared understanding. Not only shared awareness, but also shared understanding of common political and strategic goals, right? In the context of Ukraine, we often talk about the swarm of bees approach to many actors supporting this sort of unified goal. And then, last but not least, I think in today's environment, we talk and we have to talk even more about collaboration across regions, collaboration across borders. We do have great examples of that on a bilateral basis, on a regional basis. There are also EU role in there that supports some of those cross-border cooperation aspects. That is something where we should and do think about more, because it offers us to share capabilities, and have a sort of quicker surge of capabilities if and when needed as well. And last but not least, I think there's also an aspect that's related to not only having civilian capabilities and capacity to support military operations, but also the ability of military operations to support civilian crises if that additional support is needed. I'll stop here, but I have many, many other things to say later.
Excellent. And I was about to break the idea of everyone getting to answer this, because I have lots of questions already from you to others. But let's go through everyone first.
Yeah, good afternoon. First of all, I think we Estonians, we are a very lucky nation, because we don't have to guess what is our existential threat. We are living next to it, and we have lived next to it for centuries. And that's actually also the basis of our thinking regarding the total defense. First of all, as a nation, we have agreed that in case of aggression, we will never surrender. We will fight back. Yes. And even more, we have now established the aim that we will render any aggression unfeasible. In military terms, it's a very simple thing. We must win the war. At the same time, we know the fact is that nations win the war, armies win only the battles. And that sets the scene how we think about the total defense. We have to put all in if our adversary makes the move. It's not about spending more than 3% for the defense. It's once again, we are putting all in. Same as our good friends in Finland, same as our good friends in South, Latvia, Lithuania, etc. So that's the difference. In military terms, total defense, basically the system approach. We have to approach ourselves and our adversary as the system. We have to identify those critical nodes, what must be defended. Otherwise, if there will be knockout, our system will collapse and suffer the strategic paralysis. At the same time, we have to also clearly know what are those important nodes in enemy system, because we all know that the first step in crisis management is to neutralize the threat. And it doesn't matter, is it military threat or just some natural disaster. We know that neutralization of threat is the key. So that's why in total defense thinking, we have also added that to succeed in total defense, you must have, and it's mandatory to have, offensive mindset in it. You cannot be passive, waiting until somebody will do something to you and makes first move. You have to be capable to inflict also damage to your adversary from very beginning of any conflict. So small nation Estonia doesn't have very much resources. To be able to use those resources effectively, you must also have system on place. Defense means that you are preparing to deal with some kind of threat. Identifying those, it's quite easy. But total means that you are ready and capable to mobilize all assets what you have, and even more importantly, under the one very clear command. And this is something what we must work very hard. And you had also, will add also layer of collective defense, then it makes all, let's say, different. I will not go too much in details in this regard. I think the questions will help us further, but total defense is something what is mandatory for small nations. Personally, I don't like the term total defense, neither the comprehensive defense. I like to say very simple thing, readiness to win. Thank you.
All right, readiness to win, and soon readiness to answer questions. But first, have Charly.
Thank you so much. I'm brave enough to say that I like the terminology "total defense" because you can really start to work from there. So let me start by saying that in Sweden, it's perhaps good for us to hear from colleagues that the total defense concept once inspired others starting in Sweden. But it's also really important to say that where we are today, we had to have a wake-up call. We live in a situation where we didn't see the threat as clearly as you just described. And I think that is an important, different point of departure for what we are discussing here. To simplify total defense, when we start to kind of unpack the terminology and see what we are, planning for in Sweden, to simplify, it's the military defense and the civil defense all together. Mutually dependent, interdependent. Civil defense is very much in a Swedish context aligned with the NATO 7 baselines requirements. It's really about building capabilities that is there to support the military defense, but more and more there to build the resilience that will make it expensive and very hard to actually try to go against us, if you will. So it is, as you said, it's very important for us when we rebuild, when we try to build back better in Sweden now, the civil defense, it is important to say that it's about a front leaning, it's about being active, it's about really understanding the change in which we operate. What are the threats? Well, obviously what we plan for now is war. We're not trying to build our capabilities based on experiences from the pandemic, the crisis, if you will. We try to understand what it would take if we were in a situation of war. And when we do that, we realize the gaps. And they are kind of facing us tough. I mean, we do have shelters, but they've been used for bikes and amusements for many years. We have as many shelters as Finland. I think we brag, both of us, about who's got the most. But we don't have plans for evacuation, or we don't have a very sophisticated alarm system. We have a huge private sector in Sweden, but it's not owned by Sweden any longer. And we are so dependent on private sector. Almost 80% of what we discuss when we talk about who we need to work with is somebody in the private sector that has to deliver a service or a goods. And we don't have in place what NESA and Janne has. We don't have in place a secured system for securing supply, emergency supply. But we're getting there, and we're building back better together, and we do that with our colleagues, and we hope that when we have if you will see this as a chance, we can build it in the world we live in today, which will mean some flexibility into the structures. And our friends in Finland and elsewhere will join forces with us, because there are interfaces there when we can work together, because we won't be able to afford what we need in one country only. And if we can build back better for a Swedish purpose or a Finnish or somebody else's purpose, we can start to do things in common from the outset. Then I would I would hope that the president is still here. I know he's not, but he talked about a Swedish brochure. Here it is. And it doesn't say if war comes. It says if crisis or war comes. 2018, when every household in Sweden got this into their mailbox, people kind of laughed a little bit, or they felt uncomfortable with the word war. But what this wanted, the effect of this brochure, what we wanted was for people to be aware, not only that these things can happen, but more importantly, it has to do with you. You need, if you are equipped today to take care of yourself, society is expecting you to do so if crisis or war comes, and this is what you're expected to do. So it's about your responsibilities, and there are a toolbox in the brochure. When we measured the reactions half a year after and then 2 years after, people who actually read the brochure, not everybody did, but very many did, the main kind of response we got was that, so what is your feeling now when you have read this? 2/3 said, I realize my own responsibility. And this is total defense from one end to another end. The individual has a response. We have a duty in Sweden. If you are between 16 to 70, you have a duty if war comes. We are also in Sweden now building back civil conscription, so that we can make sure that the government can have capabilities for important tasks that will be needed. And this brochure is now being reviewed, and in mid-November it will be there again. It was kind of said, will it only be titled if war comes? No. But it is important in a Swedish culture to actually still talk about war. But what threats? You asked about what threats. What is equally important is that if we have to be preparing or act in heightened alert or war, we cannot ask the winter to wait. No snow, please, so we can operate. We can't ask other crises to, we can't put them on a hold. We will be in a situation where everything will happen at once. There's no pause between crises any longer. And I think when we talk about hybrid, yes, there are a lot of new threats, but we also need to realize that everything is about building robustness and resilience to make sure that we can withstand, that we can fight different kinds of crises, even in a situation of a war. We can't divide, because that's not what society looks like, and we cannot afford. So when we build back civil defense in Sweden, we have to do this in close cooperation with the military defense and other parts of society. And we will be able to show through a comprehensive approach that we have a society which is resilient to a lot of the new threats, if you will. So it's a kind of virtuous circle if you plan for it to be a virtuous circle. If you plan for it to be separate responses, we will fail. And that's kind of where total defense and comprehensive approach might be very similar in the end.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm glad you brought up the brochure. Just as a researcher, of course, I followed this, and if I remember right, a little short of 10% of the citizens who'd received it and looked at it had actually, after already 6 months, increased their own home stores and preparedness. They'd done something about it. And I think if a government can, by sending out a report, kind of decrease the requirement for civilian assistance that easily, that's a pretty good deal, in fact. That's my little pitch for Finland having to do that too. But looking at all these answers, it seems like public engagement, inclusiveness termed, came up, and part of the way that's done is through national service. So I have a two-part reflection. You can answer either one. How should publics be made more aware? We have the brochures talking about it. How do you get individuals to take responsibility? And then related to it, what is the role of national service? In Finland, we have, of course, mandatory military service for men and voluntary for women. But I have to say, as a researcher talking about comprehensive total defense, our national service doesn't quite reflect that. I'm not asking either of the generals to say, yes, we should have a mandatory national service, because that would probably be a party political thing to say. But some thoughts on, should we in fact have more conversations where individuals get trained so that they have an actual role, not just to kind of help their own family or so? And how do you think the public engagement part should be done? Civilians have some perspective, militaries may have different priorities.
Well, I'm happy to start with what we are just experiencing in Sweden. The government decided to put in place civil conscription for the rescue service. And it was, the learnings from Ukraine, where you can see tasks that the rescue service in Sweden cannot handle. They do their. We know about fires and things like that, but we don't know about the things that we have to deal with as rescue services in a situation of war. And because of the lack of enough capability, the government decided, in principle, to reinstall civil conscription as a concept and to start with the rescue services. So now, as we speak, we are training people who used to work in the civil service. They have left the rescue services. They have left it, but they have still the competence needed. They are now back to school, educated by the agency that I run. And then they will then be distributed, if you will, to the counties in Sweden as an extra resource. And this is the first of needs, if you will, where the government wants to use civil conscription. And this is not voluntary. I mean, this is not about, get ready to prepare for a week to have your own food and all of that. That's kind of something we ask people to do. This is not voluntary, and it's just the beginning.
Okay. First of all, setting the baseline for the preparedness of the society. Of course, the strategic task, they must be based on legislation. That's the first thing. The second one is that when you continue from that, it's reinforced by agreements, for example, with the private sector. And the third element is supplemented by the voluntariness of the individuals and non-governmental organizations. I think in Finland it's not that much of a question of of the understanding of the threats and risk and this kind of thing, it's quite, at least for me, self-evident that the awareness on this is quite on good level. But we almost have to understand and underline and also understand that the biggest and the most valued strengths of our society, physically, digitally, or constructively, are used as weapons against us. So there is this: what is what we value, and what is the biggest threat. They are the same thing, and that's what we must understand. And the third point on this one is concerning that in the case of emergency, multiple of those, as you said, are there enough awareness in the society on an individual level that how much of your living standards you are willing to give up? What is the level that you are ready to come down? Because this is essential question on the political side when you are preparing. That what is good enough for the society? What's good enough for the individuals?
Manage expectations.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you raise a very important question that has, as an analyst, it's just a luxury for me to sit here and muse about different models, how different countries, different organizations do things, right? And this question of how do we ensure that individuals, but also groups of individuals, society are actually prepared, that the training or information that we offer or push to them through emails, give them booklets, that they actually read them, and that knowledge actually is taken up and they maintain that knowledge and information. That's a very important question. And it is relevant for individuals, it's also relevant for organizations, groups, and it's also related to these basic skills, like very basic things like, like the safety videos on airports, where it's like first take care of yourself and then put the mask on the other person, right? That is basically what we're trying to do on the individual level a lot. But also more advanced, teaching them more advanced levels, or making sure that we give enough people who have more advanced, maybe medical, emergency services related skills as well. Ukraine really shows us the importance of the ability to surge, emergency services, firefighters, medical personnel as well, right? Hospitals are attacked. Firefighters, fire capabilities, fire stations are attacked, and firefighters themselves are killed, injured, or in some cases even captured, right? So on the one hand, of course, civil conscription, for example, different organized activities or organizations where civilians can volunteer to make sure that they gain these skills and that their skills are continuously exercised and updated is one way of doing that, almost like a sort of national defense voluntary organization for civilian or emergency preparedness skills, right? The other is working with non-governmental organizations that have that kind of capability, right? And making sure that you have an established cooperation network, and that you have a common understanding of what those requirements are, what are the TTPs, procedures that you use when you provide medical assistance, for example, evacuation, or maybe search and rescue services. So I think NGOs, non-governmental organizations, have a very important role here. But as I mentioned, the sort of certification, legal basis, and a common understanding of what are the requirements, what are the skills that you would actually want, and what is sort of allowed and permitted within your national legal framework is very important. Thanks.
Okay. And any others? I'm going to go then to some questions.
Yes, I also have one remark. First of all, to get the societies involved and heavily contributing to the total defense, there must be a sense of urgency. And we have also the program called Be Ready, what was started several years ago, and we of course started from the basic things. If something happens, you lose electricity for 7 days, that you have all the assets that you survive without the help of government. Now we have also seen that war is the reality. After 24th of February 2022, we also started to feel the sense of urgency in Estonia, that we have to prepare now to the existential threat, which is a war. So if you don't have the sense of urgency, nothing will change. Society has only, let's say, few layers of professional crisis responders, and this is the minority of the society. Main bulk of the society, if they don't feel the need to do something, they most likely will not contribute to the total defense. So total defense cannot be enforced. It can come only from inside out, from every personnel. I think today we have unique opportunity because we have the sense of urgency. And also we have already the basic skills and knowledge what must be done. The only thing is that we must also make sure that people know how important is the contribution to basically defend your own society.
Okay. Thank you. Who wants to be first? I can barely see from here. We have one question here in the back. Let's start with that, if I can, the microphone right by the camera. And then is there a second one? And then the next microphone, if we can bring it back there. Thank you.
Olen Piotr Szymański Warszawasta, Tyoskenelen idan tutkimus keskuksessa. So I'm Piotr Szymański from Warsaw. I work at the Center for Eastern Studies. And thanks a lot for this interesting discussion. And I would love to hear from you one example of a good practice in cooperation with the private sector, involving the private sector in defense from Sweden, Finland, and Estonia, something which could be duplicated Europe around. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, Benjamin Tallis, Democratic Strategy Initiative, Berlin. Thank you very much for the contested discussion over total or comprehensive defense. I don't think we're close to either, because if we're thinking about this seriously, the Estonian Chod, the general mentioned, urgency motivates, but also so does buying into your society and seeing your future in that society. Now, that's not such a huge issue for the countries represented on stage, but it's a massive issue in Germany, it's a massive issue in the UK, in France and elsewhere, where there's significant societal dissatisfaction. People don't see their better future being served by those societies. This is why we see anti-establishment politics. This is why we see the kind of polarization that President Stubb was talking about before. So there's a big question there about how do you actually buy in your societies to seeing their future in them. If you not only want to defend, but then you actually want to be ready for victory, as the general said, to be siegfähig, that has to be a whole of society victory. Yeah. So there's a lot of deep cracks that we have to address there, and I'd be very interested in the panel's view on how we can learn from your societies in that. Thank you.
Thank you. And as you think of your answers, both excellent questions. My quick reflection on the latter one, I often show a fragile state index map. It has like 120 different things that are measured in society. I don't show it because Finland usually ends up being number one. I show it to make the point that 100 years ago, if the map was made, Finland would be deep, deep red, having gone through the per capita deadliest civil war in then modern history, not being effectively industrialized, et cetera, et cetera. And it is the 4 or 5 generations since then that have made Finland a society and country worth defending. It took a lot of political compromise. It took a lot of accepting, I don't agree with this, but we need to make the country to work. I wish there was a quick answer to it other than multiple generations working together. But now, who wants to off either a private sector example or a reflection on
both.
society?
No, sorry. Well, no, please start.
No.
Okay.
After you.
I'm not going to say ladies first, but I did. First of all, start with the latter, and from a good point of departure, you can't lose the trust and commitment between parts of society if you have it already, which I think is a fair description of Sweden. When we did the pandemic, people kind of trusted recommendations. And that is something that you really need to nurture. So what are the threats to what we're trying to build now? Well, they are internal, as you say. Even, I mean, criminality in Sweden is really, really a difficult issue as we speak, and it is polarizing people's opinion. One of the things that we are working with from the agency that I lead, and to understand this, Sweden has very lean ministries. The government executes through agencies. There are 290 agencies in Sweden, that is the public service, if you will. If the Swedish people would start to really distrust those, things will start to dismantle very much. It's not only the government, it is the service through the agencies. So one of the things that we need to do when we ask people, based on some real threat, that take responsibility for yourself, we, the agencies, need to show much better, to communicate much better how we serve. And media won't help, because everybody wants to kind of scrutinize the agencies. We are not allowed to tell good stories, if you will, in the media. So this
you are.
We are here, but I do think that it's such an important critical success factor so far. If you don't nurture that relationship, you might lose it like that. And it's really, when you have a system like the ones that I describe, it's very much to the agencies and the government, and we think about it every day. So, yeah, that's just, the kind of, to share with you that if you got something of this, don't lose it. Because if you lose it, you can't build back easily. So we think about that a lot. Private sector. First of all, the private sector in our country, they are ahead of the rest of the system. They are very demanding. They see good reasons to be involved. They want to help out, but they also want to make business. So their driving forces are really there. Good examples, well, one of them is really the innovation and new technologies that public sector doesn't know of enough. 3D printing is something that we put in practice for military use, and there is a lot of good examples like incubators in the private sector today. But what they ask us for is, we need to know a little bit more strategically, what are the demands in the case of war? Who is actually the one that we should talk to? How do we come into the public sector and have a partner to discuss with? And thirdly, who's actually going to pay in the end? And when we still are trying to find the playing field for this, it is a little bit of a worry now that we lose not trust, but that the private sector is kind of not patient enough to really engage. So this is something that we struggle with, and we work a lot with NESA to find good ways forward. But the other challenge, if you will, is that the bureaucracy and legislation is not inspiring, if you will, collaboration with private sector. There are a lot of no-go zones. So a lot of what we have to do, we have to find new informal ways of working, and public sector is not necessarily used to that. So good examples, yes, but we need to tackle this actor, which is the most important one, in a more systemic way, and inspire each other in doing so.
Can I jump in? Have you changed laws in Sweden to enable this cooperation more? I ask because after 2014, many people in Finland went through basically every law that has to do with national security to see where are the loopholes, what needs to be fixed, and there's a whole program of doing this, because it's kind of unsexy to change laws, but it improves the authorities' ability to do something or cooperate.
We are kind of in the middle of doing what you've done, but I would say that before it gets better, it gets worse. Okay. Because a lot of the security measures that we have to deal with. It doesn't allow everybody to be in the room, if you see what I mean. So private sector feel a little bit, we are not invited in the discussions that we need to be in. So security is hindering before we will get into that. There are also new legislation and how to make, agreements with companies and so on, but it's early days.
Thoughts? Yeah, thanks. Practical examples of the cooperation. First of all, let's take the Baltic Connector, the case from last spring. That was an example of cooperation between the authorities, defense forces, border guards, police, on Finnish and on Estonian side. Second example is the local defense concept of Finland, which is not so much about the defense forces. It's about cooperation on the very practical local level, as name dictates. So it means that not only the authorities, but also some local companies are involved in the exercises. Third practical example is our system of strategic partners for the defense forces. We have a few of them, which, for example, the maintenance of our main weapon systems for all the services, catering service, and so forth. And the point in the strategic partnership is not that it's cost efficient during the normal times, during the peacetime. It's something that derives from the requirements of the wartime conditions. And the fourth example is the cooperation with other elements of the private sector, smaller and bigger businesses and companies on a practical level, because in the case of emergency, for example, when we mobilize, we will use these companies to support the system from the day one. And the key element here is that you plan and you exercise on a yearly basis, annually, so that you are really sure that it really works when it's needed to.
And for those who don't know about this in Finland, so it's a series of biannual exercises run by the defense forces, but most of the participants are in fact not defense forces. It's all the authorities, companies, down to schools and daycare, because are we reservists going to show up if all the kids are just somewhere? No, so it's a whole broad range of private sector and other authorities who are in on it.
Yeah, I would like also have one comment regarding the private sector involvement. I just refer back to the COVID-19 pandemics, where most of the testing in the very beginning of the crisis were done by the private sector in Estonia. Of course, vaccination later on, but why it's important, simultaneously also the Estonian Defence Forces field hospital was deployed to certain areas. So it was combination, and it set the scene how we can mobilize all the medical assets in times of a very big crisis. And I think this is something we have to also consider. Of course, we may say that this is part of the business. Of course it is, but it doesn't matter. The war is also business for somebody. Yeah. But also in daily activities, a lot of Estonian firefighter teams are so-called voluntary-based, but actually owned by private sector. Sea rescue, stuff like that one. So we have a lot of things that some of the people are basically putting their own resources to build up some of the capabilities, what is urgently needed to deal with some of the smaller crises. And of course, we know that a lot of our wartime assets coming from the private sector, because there is no point to buy your own green-colored trucks if you can take them from somebody else who will not need them during the crisis. Exactly. And those are, let's say, the cross-use of different assets. Also regarding how we can get more our population involved, this is actually quite simple, and we all know that one. We have to have very clear strategic narrative which combines us together. And we have to also avoid that we are focusing on the threat. No, we have to and must focus on desired future, what we are seeking for. Threat is only one of the elements which maybe prevents us to achieve this one. We have to deal with the threats, but we have to seek our much better future, which is desirable for most of our societies. Thank you.
Yeah, I will respond quickly to the second question. I think in addition to having a unified strategic vision for the future, right, a common understanding of what the threat actually is, that really helps. But that is not the only thing here. When we talk about comprehensive defense and preparedness, we talk about actions that are, crisis preparedness, civilian preparedness, civil defense, and preparing for war on the civilian side actually overlap. So a lot of the activities, preparations that you would be doing for natural hazards, for man-made or natural hazards, or to prepare for war may be very similar, right? Okay, in terms of shelters, air raid shelters are much more hardened than maybe shelters that you may need for other purposes, so there are differences, definitely. But the mindset of preparedness, certain quite simple actions, ensuring that you have resilient medical system, emergency services, that you have prepared civilians, that they know what needs to be done, that your public, government, and NGO sectors, and also private sectors are resilient, exactly what I'm talking about. That does not necessarily has to be directly linked to a primary aim of preparing for war or invasion. It can definitely, and it must also be linked to preparing for crises. Now that we're having more and more natural hazards, there are a lot of reasons in our modern world to prepare for other types of crises as well.
I agree wholeheartedly. For years, I'd be asked if I want to give a talk that is Finland preparing for World War III? And I said, well, no, there's a whole range of man-made or natural disasters. I mean, you may need to evacuate civilians for a range of reasons and work with local bus companies for that. So absolutely. We have time for some questions here in between. There was one, and I did see one here in front earlier, but maybe the question is gone, but start with that.
Hi, Alex DL. I'm from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute in Ottawa, Canada. So a lot of what you've been talking about so far is a little bit top-down. It's about, sending information down, mobilizing, knowing people to be ready, but I still kind of sense it's a little bit when the word comes. President Stubb spoke to the fact that there's two wars, Ukraine and then this kind of hybrid war. So I'm interested for examples, probably particularly in line with that, the sabotage, allegations of Russian sabotage that are appearing throughout Europe. In terms of having information flow upward and having your society ready to know who to speak to and making sure that local information rises up to the level that needs to handle it. Thanks very much.
Okay. And, yep, back there.
Markus Holmgren from Finnish Institute of International Affairs. I talked about, or rather you talked about what is the most valuable is always the target, and also that our importance of locating the critical know-how, civilian expertise in a crisis is increasing. Well, I guess we could summarize it in that our dependency on privately produced capabilities is increasing. The scope of technologies utilized in wartime and that are produced by private sector is ever increasing, not only in terms of the military tech, but also of communication and analytics and all sorts of technologies. And the worry in wartime then is that when these capabilities are in private hand, how to make sure that we keep getting them into wartime. So any suggestions how to build this kind of resiliency of commitment so that these companies, and especially if they're foreign companies, keep servicing the wartime economy when country risk rises. Whether we talk about technologies themselves or services that maintain those technological systems that military capabilities and civil society depend on.
Thank you. I'm sure we're going to hear some military examples of how to ensure this as well as then civilian ones. Who wants to start?
I will start with the first question. First of all, the war is always hybrid. It has been hybrid and it will be in the future. And it means that the enemy will use different approaches, assets, just to achieve their own goals. At the same time, also, the war is actually a combination of different crises. They just happen simultaneously. You must have resources to deal with them at the same time. For example, military forces conduct multi-domain operations to destroy enemy. At the same time, of course, there will happen some wildfire. If some dam will be blown up, you will have flooding, you have mass casualties in your, let's say, rural areas. That's combination. Every time it's combination. We see this in Ukraine. So the hybrid is something which is also confusing. We have to clearly understand what we mean about the hybrid. If you're talking all activities below open armed conflict, that's a little bit different story. There can be everything. Now the question is, who will be responsible to deal with this kind of crisis? Who will be so-called supported commander and who will be supporting of it? This is military term, but this is the easiest way to understand this one. So I would argue that everything what is below armed conflict is not military forces, let's say, responsibility to deal with as supported command. That must be somebody else. And that's also important because when you go to the open war, those small crises somewhere all around your state and society must be dealt with the different authorities anyway. It cannot be just that military forces will lead that one. And second question, I think it's maybe easier from our perspective that we are relying on the reserve forces. And it means that the reserve personnel coming from some kind of position from society, changing from civilian to the trained soldier. So if we have plans in place that we will take some heavy digging machinery from somebody, it will be best solution that it comes together with our reservist who will operate the same machine, but it operates daily in the daily business. He makes sure that this is working. He makes sure that if this will be replaced, that it will be available for the military forces. So if you have a reserve-based system, this is one of the easiest solutions. No need for legislation. It's just concept how to do this one.
Okay. About the technology, I think we all agree on the fact that it's now on the civilian side where the development is. And that's a fact that the problem is not basically on a national level. For example, in the case of Europe, it's the European level. So what was described in one report that 80% of the European raw materials, components, technology is exported. 80. So we need to do something on that one so that the supply chains, the production and the security of supply is secured on a European level. As discussed in the President Stubb's session and also here is that if we say that our collective cooperation is in a phase of disintegration, so we need to build it up again. And kind of European interdependencies are heavy vulnerabilities as we speak. So we need to correct that one. Of course, we cannot be self-sufficient in the technology. That's for sure. That's clear. But what we need to look all the supply chains, the production chains, so that we can be sure that also in the case of an emergency, it works. And of course, the COVID was a very good teacher on this one when we were relying too much on just on market. I'll leave it at that one. One point, yes. Sorry. Competencies. The security of supply of competency, so that you make sure that within Finland, within Europe, you have the competency, you have the intellectual capability and capacity to sustain your system, so that there's no brain leakage to everybody, that you are not just reliant on somebody else, but you really have the educational system and you have the companies and the private sector ready to support the societies with this kind of a capital, intellectual capital.
So I will address the first question, which was about sort of hybrid attacks, and the way I understood the question was about the sort of information flow from bottom to top rather than sort of the government telling everyone what is going. Of course, there is the official intelligence services, government reporting, and sort of audit and trying to investigation mechanisms that exist. But besides that, and I've actually faced this question in other forums as well. So how do we engage with local communities, regions as well? Because local communities are the ones that are there at the time of the attack. They may have more information. They may understand the environment much better. And one is empowering local governments and municipalities. They have a very big role, I think, in resilience building overall. They also have the networks. They have the understanding of the environment, of the private and government actors that exist. And the other part is also, what is the situation with media reporting? And here I'd say that a key aspect is ensuring that we do have, in our media, that we do have regional reporting, regional reporters that cover regions and actually have good insights and go to those places, even the most remote parts of our countries. So I think that reliable reporting in the media is very important. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I run the risk of being too long, but I will try not to. So the question on how do you make sure that the bottom-up kind of, and you need a system and you need relationships and you need more technology to serve it. So in our country, again, the Swedish example, there is a system, an old system and a new system coming together since 2 years back, the preparedness system, if you will. And it starts from the local level. 290, I don't know why we have 290 municipalities as well as 290 agencies. It's a coincidence, but that's the case. So the local municipalities, they have a system that they quickly report to a county level. And the node in this system is the agency that I lead, MSB. And that's the geographical flow, if you will, from the municipality upwards. But then you have the horizontal, which is the agencies. 60 agencies in Sweden are mandated and obliged to work really focusing on preparedness as one of their capabilities. So they are also part of this system. And regularly, this group of people come together to paint a situational picture. And the picture is about what is happening in society and how are we equipped to mitigate. So it's an ongoing, circle like this. What we find is that it used to serve us very well, and it still does, but it's slow. So we need new technologies, and we need to make sure that it's, not fake. But we need technology to serve this system quicker. And that's where we are really now looking into new solutions. But we have the system, we have the relationships. What we also find in this system is that during crisis, it was okay to have a civil servant on a kind of, mid-level in all of this. But the harder it gets, the more important it is that you actually reach the leader, that you escalate to the decision maker. And this is something that we are now kind of aware of, that it has to happen, and that CEOs or heads of agencies, they need to take into their new role leading crisis. And it's not, it's not a given. So to get this system, up, bottom up, top down, to really work, you need the top level more engaged as well.
All right, thank you. My reflections to the first question, relationships. I mean, if you go to the Finnish border, most of the people are happy to tell the local police or the border guard, I saw this. Now, I wish there was a system that I believe exists in at least most of Ukraine, where you can actually, once you've identified yourself, you can also send a picture and the video of the suspicious car or truck or whatever it is. So again, there's lots, I think, that we can learn from people who are doing it better under duress or learning of more. But then there's the cyber issue. I think it was broached here, I think, earlier. The private sector, of course, doesn't always have an interest in telling everyone about an intrusion. But on the other hand, the government then maybe be withholding. So it's very hard to know. We were the only attacked energy company, or did this happen to everyone? And I at least haven't heard anyone quite solve this conundrum yet, because there, I guess, speed is of great importance. Question, the idea of supporting and supported came up. Disinformation has also come up. So this brings me to the idea of communications. Sometimes military and civilian organizations, actors, private sector, have different interests in what you communicate. The president alluded to this. Do you want to raise awareness, or do you want to say everything's under control? How do you deal with this? Defense forces, Estonia or Finland, Sweden, or transatlantically? I mean, the White House says things openly that Finnish authorities would never say. How should we think about this in a total defense construct in terms of communication? Is it whoever's leading the action leads the communication?
Yeah, I guess if I start that's of course not only communication, but it leads the whole response. Who is of course in charge. But when it comes to the strategic communications, what is the message for the citizens, for the population concerning the crisis and the issues of, if I take the perspective on the military, from the military side, and what I've been emphasizing is not that, as Andrus said, not the threat, but our own response and our own measures to be taken. And of course that's based on three elements. It's based on that you really have the capabilities, or if you don't, you have to develop them. Secondly, you have the will, and you show it. And third one is the communication part, which is not verbal. It doesn't have to be verbal. It can be also that you show that this is what we are prepared for. And personally, I think it's of course a option is to say that, okay, within 5 years there is an opportunity that we are in war against this kind of a adversary. But my approach is that it's best to concentrate on your own doing, your own security, on your own measures in order to match up with the different possible scenarios and lines of operation, because that's the one part you can influence. That's the one thing that you can concentrate on, not just being afraid what's going to happen in the future. Same goes with the other incidents and other crises also.
Yeah, situational awareness must always be translated to situational understanding. And this is the challenge. You may have all the information what you can get, but if you cannot translate it to understanding, this creates some confusion. And we can also be 100% sure that if something happens in terms of military incursion, we will lose the comms, at least temporarily. That will be 100% guaranteed. You cannot call to your pair to say, okay, something happened. The only thing how you can cope with this one is also military term, the mission command. The people must know what they must do in the case of something happens. And they must also be able to figure out how they accomplish the mission until they know what for they are doing this one. So those are the things that must be also integrated to the total defense mindset. It's not only technical solutions, it also mindset and concept must be put together, and that's how we can actually cope with all the unknowns what we even may not be able to ask today.
Yeah, I guess the president again referred to Sweden, and it's so important to start with when somebody makes a choice how to communicate, the government or, in this case, the government and the military defense and the civil defense in Sweden, when the choice was made was that we need to talk about the things that we haven't talked about. We need to talk about war because we take things for granted. That was the kind of point of departure, and I think it is fair to say that it probably has served the awareness in a Swedish context. But there are things that you need to know, the consequences. Children in Sweden were kind of very scared because what we didn't know, it doesn't matter, but what we didn't realize was that everything was communicated on TikTok directly to kids. And no parent is, all of this. It's a panel in itself. So the consequences was not managed. Nobody was equipped to kind of say, yes, to talk. You talk to children. Children want to be talked to, so it's not to avoid, but it is to be prepared again for the consequences, and we were not necessarily prepared for that. But I do think that a lot of other good consequences has come out of that, this could be reality. The other thing that I do think, and I talked about it before, we have the threat level of terrorism and antagonistic threat in Sweden has been, increased. And that was communicated to the public. And the public said, what am I going to do about this? What are you asking me to do? Why do I need to know this? You have to be aware. Well, what is to be aware for me as an individual? And that's where I think we need to know when we communicate that somebody is going to ask him or herself, what do I need to do? And if we cannot manage that, then I think we run a risk of communicating something that might not necessarily lead to the outcome that we are transparent, but maybe we didn't think about the consequences enough. So it has to be managed, I think, more than necessarily been done so far. Learning as we speak.
So my fellow panelists made amazing points. I completely agree. What I wanted to add to this is we can have communications from trusted government actors, which is great. But at the moment, we have a very, very saturated information space, right? Mm. So many people just don't know what does it mean exactly, the explanation part. And Charly, I wanted to address the question that you actually asked at the very beginning of the panel, is where do our organizations come in? I happen to work for a research organization that provides nonpartisan, unbiased, objective research, right? So, and this is a little bit of a plug, but unintended completely, but I really think that this is why we need research organizations or explainers or unbiased media that explains what does this actually mean. That you can go to and, we need our fact checkers, we need our researchers, we need our unbiased, unpartisan media that explains to everyone who wants that information what really is going on. Thanks.
Okay. Agree. I think we have still time for a question. We have one right here. And then if there's one more, I'm happy to take it.
Hello, my name is Maxim Kravchuk. I am from the Embassy of Ukraine. And I changed my question over this discussion 3 times in my mind. Look, of course, for Ukrainians, it's a little bit difficult to build our perception of the total defense, because we have total defense on the ground right now. But my question to you, a little bit provocative. How much time do you have to build total defense in Europe? So in other words, how much time Ukraine have to win this war? And I would relate these two questions into another one. How could we raise awareness in Europe that Ukraine's victory is game changer? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I guess we'll take that. Yeah, Marta.
I have one sentence, I guess, to say. In my view, comprehensive security or total defense is not an end state, it's a process. So it will never end, the process will never end, and you will never, I guess, you can achieve a state where that you're comfortable with, but something always changes, vulnerabilities change, threats change, situation change, so it never really stops. Thanks.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And concerning the awareness of the situation in Ukraine and the necessity of the war to end in a favorable position for Ukraine, of course we understand it very well. I guess all of us here presenting countries nearby Russia, if that's not going to happen, then peace, so-called peace, will be a pause. And who is going to be the next one? That will be the question in a sense. We all understand that in every case we will have an angry Russia behind the border. But in the worst case, we have also empowered Russia. And then we really need the comprehensive security approach. And as you said, it's a process.
Yeah.
You cannot have a timeline for that. That you need to start today, preferably yesterday, but at least today, and you must do it tomorrow and the day after and so forth.
Yeah, the question, how much time do we have? If I say any years, it will get viral, and I think I cannot stop it anymore. But I would say one thing, we are already too late, because Russia is preparing for the escalation. It's unknown when it happens, where it happens, and how it looks like, but they at least currently have started a little bit earlier than we did. So we have to not only catch the Russians, but even do more to be ready once again to render any aggression against us, not only Estonians, but us, unfeasible. That's the key. Russia doesn't need 10 years to prepare, and Russia is not stupid to give us this 10 years. He will make the next move as soon. He will be ready to basically achieve much higher tempo than can we respond. Ukrainians today not fighting for us. Frankly speaking, they are fighting and dying instead of us. The Russia decided to attack Ukraine. I will bet Russia had different options, but I think the most urgent one was to select Ukraine. That's the key. So the first thing what we must do now is just look to the mirror as a society and state that after war times are over. Now we are again in the pre-war times. Let's make whatever it takes to prevent war to happen. Most critical one is to support Ukraine to win, because if Ukraine loses, then we have completely different setup. And winning for Ukraine means not to just destroy Russian tanks in Ukrainian territory, to destroy the targets which are the legitimate one in the Russian territory, which are feeding the Russian war machine. That's the key. That's what we can do now, and that's part of the total defense. We are contributing to the defense of Ukraine and creating total defense among ourselves. Thank you.
So 2 time frames. One is the planned one, where it takes money and building new competencies. 5 years is the kind of long-term plan, but we really exercise regularly if it happens tomorrow. So there's two time perspectives, tomorrow and a little bit more long-term. It's a very technical answer, but I think, again, that's where we are. We need to mainstream the awareness that this can happen tomorrow. So some years ago, we did these huge exercises that took 2 years to plan, and then, now we provide a lot of desktop or tabletop exercises to keep people alert to, if it happens tomorrow, we need to work with what we have. So that's the two perspectives.
And we are ready for tomorrow, and not only to fight back once again, but we're ready to win. But the cost today is too high for the victory. That's what for we have to build up the total defense.
Wow, thank you. I'm not even going to try to summarize. I feel like your last 4 comments would have been a perfect just summary of our discussion, but some key takeaways. So what I'd like to do is just to ask everyone here to give a round of applause for what I think is a brilliant set of panelists. Thank you very much. Thank you also to the audience on the stream. We will be back tomorrow at 8:45 when we discuss a potential wrench in all of this, that is transatlantic relations and the US elections. Thank you very much.